Philippine indigenous community, indigenous communities, and its people. What are indigenous communities? Indigenous peoples are inheritors and practitioners of unique cultures and ways of relating to people and the environment. They have retained social, cultural, economic, and political characteristics that are distinct from those of the dominant societies in which they live. Despite their cultural differences, indigenous people from around the world share common problems related to the protections of their right as distinct peoples. Indigenous peoples have sought recognitions of their identities, way of life, and their right to traditional lands, territories, and natural resources for years. Yet, throughout history, their rights have always been violated. Indigenous peoples today are arguably among the most disadvantaged and vulnerable groups of people in the world. The international community now recognizes that special measures are required to protect their rights and maintain their distinct cultures and way of life. Who are the indigenous peoples? The Indigenous Peoples' Rights Act defines indigenous people as a group of people or homogeneous societies identified by self-ascription and ascription by others who have continuously lived as an organized community on communally bounded and defined territory and who have occupied, possessed, and utilized such territories under claims of ownership since the time immemorial, sharing common bonds of language, customs, traditions, and other distinctive cultural traits, or who, as a result of their resistance to colonial, political, social, and cultural intrusions, non-indigenous religions and culture have traditionally distinguished themselves from the majority of Filipinos. Philippines is a culturally diverse country with an estimated of 17 million indigenous peoples, belonging to 110 ethno-linguistic groups in 2010. In the Philippines, there are 110 ethno-linguistic groups comprising 17% of the country's total population in 2010. There are 7 ethnographic regions as follows. Number 1 is the Cordillera Administrative Region and Region 1. Number 2 is Region 2. Number 3, Region 3 and the rest of Luzon. Island groups and the rest of Visayas. Northern and Western Mindanao. Central Mindanao and Southern and Eastern Mindanao. Guide to IPRA, CIPRAD, Panlipe cited from NCIP Info Kit. Indigenous people are examples of the following communities. Number 1, we have the Igorot. Igorot is the generic and collective term for the indigenous peoples of northern Luzon's Cordillera Mountain Range. It is derived from the prefix I, or people from, and Golot, mountain, to literally mean people from the mountains. This term was previously considered demeaning, but it has increasingly been acknowledged and appropriated by indigenous activists as a term of glory and their individuality as indigenous peoples. Next is the Lumad. Others use the name Lumad to refer to the indigenous peoples of Mindanao, which have the highest population of indigenous peoples in the country. It is a Visayan phrase that means of the land, local, or indigenous. The Lumad are a diverse group of indigenous peoples spread across the islands of Mindanao. There are 18 major Lumad groups, namely Subanen, Blaan, Tibuli, Mandaya, Mansaka, Tiruray, Higaonon, Manobo, Bagubo, Bukidnon, Tagkaulo, Ubo, Banwaon, Kalagan, Dibabawon, Talaanding, Mamanwa, and Manguangan. Third is the Mangyan. Mangyan is a collective title for the indigenous people of Mindoro and Sibuyan Islands. They are traditionally divided into 2 groups, the Northern Mangyan, Tadyawan, Alangan, and Iraya, and Southern Mangyan, Buhid, Taubuid, and Hanunuo. Palawan's islands are also home to a number of indigenous peoples. Tagbanwa or Kalamianen, Palauan, Mulbog, and Batak are among them. Negrito is a generic name for indigenous peoples with particular physical characteristic as short, dark skin, curly hair who lives in various parts of the Philippines from north to south. They are approximately 30 Negrito groups identified. Who are the IPs or the indigenous peoples in Luzon? There are Balangao, Buntok, Aplay, Kalinga, Kankanay, Ifugao, Ibaloy, Bago, Gadang, Etneg, Apayaw, Barlig, Aita, Ikaluna, Kalanguya, Baliwen are the indigenous peoples in this region. Aplay, Balangao, Baliwon, Kankanay, and Buntok are the 5 major tribes. Kankanays are the most numerous, followed by Buntoks and Aplay. Their main source of income includes farming, primarily for consumption, weaving, construction labor, and many more. In a given, one example, the Gadangs are indigenous people in Luzon. The history of Gadangs. The Gadangs may have entered the Cagayan River from the north. They could have taken over the Cagayan Valley following the Aitas. The early people were familiar with rice cultivating practices. The Spaniards arrived in the late 16th and early 17th centuries and introduced Christianity, haciendas, and the tobacco monopoly. Most Gadangs lived in confined villages as a result of the Spaniards' resettlement scheme, while others stay in the uplands. Many of the resettled Gadangs converted to Christianity, and a schism developed between Christian and non-Christian Gadangs. The Christian Gadangs make fun of their non-Christian counterparts, referring to them as Kalinga. As a result of this historical animosity, there were numerous conflicts including headhunting, forays performed on a regular basis by non-Christian Gadangs in Christian territory. Christian Gadangs were mainly absorbed into Ilocano or Filipino society throughout time, although upland Gadangs largely preserved their pre-Spanish customs. Next is the characteristics of Gadangs. Physical characteristics as well as economic, social, and educational status differ among the Gadangs. Some people have fair skin while others have dark skin. Some have huge farms and are rich enough to employ farm employees, whilst others have little or no land. Some have watertight toilets, while others have no toilets at all. Some have no idea what their age is or have not completed grade school, but others have achieved a tertiary education. Some of the ladies completed high school and one even went on to college. Some parents did not record their children's births because it was not their custom. Most marriages are arranged and parental selection is accepted. Tradition is evolving. Thank you.